The top story on ABC News Breakfast, the federal government has offered to pay clubs at least $37 million in compensation to trial poker machine reforms. The government plans to trial mandatory pre-commitment technology across the ACT next year, ahead of a possible national rollout in 2016.
It's also offered more than $1 million for training and business planning. Independent MP Andrew Wilkie has withdrawn his support for the government, and Tony Abbott is accusing the Prime Minister of breaking another promise.
For more, Andrew Green joins us now from Canberra. And Andrew, it seems that Andrew Wilkie really has stepped up his language in the last 24 to 48 hours in dealing with the government.
Yeah, in a series of interviews over the weekend, Melissa, the independent MP for the seat of Denison, is really sounding like a man who's quite angry and bitter with what has happened over the weekend, with Julia Gillard's announcement on Saturday that the push for mandatory pre-commitment will be delayed. Now, as you'll recall, Andrew Wilkie did help deliver Julia Gillard, her minority government, with a pledge to guarantee supply and to back the government in no confidence motions. He's now telling Labor that that's not necessarily guaranteed. So the threats are certainly there that he could potentially help bring down the government in the future. But of course, Labor does enjoy a one-vote buffer with the defection of Peter Slipper. But perhaps his most telling threat is that about the budget. He says he'll be now scrutinising all the measures in the May budget, which gives Wayne Swan a real headache as he pushes to deliver that promised surplus in 2012-13. So that's perhaps the immediate headache for Labor, is that Andrew Wilkie is now going to be someone who they can't necessarily rely on for each piece of legislation that comes before Parliament.
So we could see Julia Gillard with a few more headaches come budget time, but is there any likelihood that Andrew Wilkie will do what Tony Abbott would like and potentially support a no-confidence motion and bring about an early election?
You can never rule these things out, but all the evidence would suggest that would just be a bridge too far for Andrew Wilkie. If he was to help overturn the minority Labor government, of course, he loses his relevancy as a key independent in a hung parliament, potentially by handing his vote to Tony Abbott. Tony Abbott could then rush off and call an election. So self-preservation is the best thing going for the independents. For Rob Oakeshott and Tony Windsor, there's certainly no appetite to go to an early election while the hung parliament continues to run its course. And as you'd expect at this stage, barring any kind of disasters, the current parliament will hold for a little bit longer.
And we've also got some New South Wales Labor MPs claiming victory because of Julia Gillard's back down on this. Can you take us through that?
Yeah, well, Clubs Australia was certainly celebrating over the weekend, and Labor MPs in marginal New South Wales seats that are very dependent on club revenue and very club-oriented seats. The local members are very happy, of course, with this back down by the Prime Minister, and they're saying that it's a victory for common sense. And one of the people, interestingly, who's writing about it today is the member for Doe Bell, Craig Thompson, who Tony Abbott, incidentally, is targeting following Andrew Wilkie's decision to withdraw support. He says the Labor government, Tony Abbott says the Labor government now rests on the vote of Craig Thompson as a number of investigations continue into his conduct. Well, Craig Thompson is writing today in the News Limited press that the Prime Minister's decision was a victory for common sense, and she provided judgment and skill to course a path that is sensible and logical. So in a way, these New South Wales MPs are claiming part of the credit for the decision to delay mandatory pre-commitment.
It seems a bit strange that he's suggesting that this outcome that we have now is proper policy making process, because it suggests that the government's original plan wasn't. And I would have thought it would be surprising for Craig Thompson to be criticising the Prime Minister so directly, given his own personal circumstances. That's
right. Someone who he is someone who's relied very much on Julia Gillard's strong support, even though she has perhaps tempered it a little bit in recent times. But yeah, look, some people will read into this and say, gosh, if you're relying on Craig Thompson's support at this time, that's not necessarily a good thing. But yes, Craig Thompson is part of a very vocal minority of New South Wales Labor MPs who were genuinely concerned about the prospects of holding their seats if this pokies legislation, as devised by Andrew Wilkie, was to be in place before the next election. Of course, with the weekend's decision, this means that any overall decision on pokies legislation will be pushed out well beyond the expected election in 2013.
Andrew Green, thanks for explaining it all to us.
Thanks, Melissa.